had that mindset of this is never going to work. We know how to weld. We know what we're doing back there. And, I had to convince him, like, we're not questioning whether you are skilled at your job. We know you are. What we're questioning is whether or not we've set you up for success.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Tanner McClure to the show. Now, Tanner has a really cool background in lean. He's got a really strong educational background, you'll hear, like more of an engineering background. And then he sort of got into lean later in his career. And so we talk a little bit about how that's worked, first of all, how he got started with this whole lean thing. And then as he's gotten into different leadership roles, he's had the opportunity to apply lean in a variety of ways. In particular, we talk about how if he's faced with some resistance, which many of us in the lean world have faced from time to time, or a lot of the time, of like, how does he approach that, or how has he approached resistance? In fact, even with people who might be a supervisor or a manager and they're resisting, we often talk about the frontline workers resisting, but what if your supervisors and your management team is resisting? Like, how do you go ahead and counter that? And so we had a really good conversation about that. And then we also talked about some specific tools that Tanner has used successfully over the years. And there's one particular tool that he really likes. He calls it the paper doll exercise. And so we really get into that. In fact, we talk about it, and then I came back to it later because I wasn't quite sure exactly what he was talking about. And so we really dig into like how he goes about doing that exercise. And finally, we wrap up the episode by really just kind of talking about how folks who might be just getting started with lean, like what can they do, especially if they're struggling or they're facing some hurdles. What are some practical things that they can do to kind of get that momentum built up? So show notes can be found over at gembapodcast.com. Just look for episode 574. Again, gembapodcast.com and look for episode 574. Okay, enough from me. Let's get to the show. Tanner, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going really well. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah. So where are you calling in from?
I am in Independence, Kansas, kind of southeast Kansas, small town, great place to live. So
okay, lots of basketball played there, I guess.
Kansas is a basketball state for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, hey, Tanner, I know you've listened to the show, and you know how we like to get things started with our guest sharing a quote. So what do you got?
The quote I've got for today is, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. That's from Albert Einstein.
What's that mean to you?
To me, it really means you got to challenge yourself to think in ways that maybe even surprise yourself to try and get out of a problem you find yourself in. So if you just, it's too easy to kind of fall back on the tools you always use. And always think that that's going to get you out of whatever problem you're in. But sometimes you need to look beyond and maybe try something new and try something different.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Experiment your way forward, right?
Right. Yeah.
See what you learn. Yeah, good stuff. All right. Well, hey, tell us a little bit about yourself, Tanner. Tell us about your background, how you first got involved in all this continuous improvement stuff, and what you're up to these days.
Yeah. So my background, I went to school at Kansas State University, got an engineering degree, mechanical engineering, and, really enjoyed product design and things like that. And so that was how I kind of started my professional career, was in design. Eventually started getting into management of engineering, and got introduced to lean at a company called Eldorado Bus in Salina, Kansas. And I had a leader there who was just really a huge proponent of lean thinking. And I really appreciated the kind of the passion he showed. And he's a guy by the name of Bryce Pfister. And I learned from him really about how lean can be used to affect the culture of a company, and got to take part in a lot of lean events like Kaizens and training sessions, and really opened my eyes to the power of that thinking in a culture of a company. Mm-hmm. And so as I moved on from engineering into operations, I became an operations leader at that bus company. Mm-hmm. And started really using lean in my departments to try and get my team thinking about how do I make improvements, so even small improvements day to day over, what kind of has been the standard. And just seeing that the snowball effect that you get from, one guy, two guys, five guys, all of a sudden, are looking for those opportunities all the time. Mm-hmm. And the problems that used to persist now all of a sudden just kind of melt away. And all of a sudden you're finding out, well, now we've got too many people in this department. We need to, we can take those people who now are, struggling to find things to do in that department. Let's move them somewhere else that's struggling. Mm-hmm. And, so that's kind of the origin story of lean in my life. And I really have enjoyed watching that happen too.
Now, do you think that with your education, sort of engineering background or whatever, like, did that help? Like you personally sort of embrace this whole idea of lean, or was it just like you weren't sure about it? I'll give it a try. Like, what was that like?
So it was kind of hit and miss. When you get in the engineering mindset, sometimes it felt like, as a mechanical engineer, there were several things that you're not necessarily exposed to that maybe an industrial engineer might have been exposed to. And so some of the concepts were a little bit foreign when they, when I was exposed to them at first. And then the more you think about them and the more you try to include those in your day to day, you find that, oh man, I was missing this whole part, this whole experience from, the schooling that I achieved. And so in some ways it was difficult. And then, but in a lot of other ways, once you think about, approaching things from the scientific method of, let's make a hypothesis here and test it. And, once you come back to that, then it's like, okay, now I can really align that with the schooling that I received as part of my engineering degree. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you mentioned, so you've had a lot of different roles, and some of your roles have been in leadership. And so I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about resistance, in particular, resistance by people that might actually be in sort of like a management or a supervision role. Like, that's a particularly difficult situation, because you often think of like the front line, we're trying to get the front line bought in. But if you don't have your sort of middle management bought in, how in the world are you going to get the front line bought in? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So what I've found is that, as you mentioned, the frontline team, they take usually less convincing that an improvement to their process is going to help them do their job, right? Like they can see pretty clearly that if you make a change, how that change will affect their day to day. And so what the challenge becomes is you may have a supervisor or somebody who is really just invested in, let's get done today's, goal. And that's all I'm focused on, is today's goal. And so those people can be pretty resistant to, well, I'm going to borrow so-and-so for half the day and we're going to do some improvement. Right. And so what I've done in the past and had really good success with is try to include those people as much as possible in the process. So for instance, a great example at the bus company was our weld shop. We had a lead in the weld shop that was just about as negative as somebody could be toward the whole lean, going through the training and making the effort of including people, relieving them from their from their normal duties for the entire week and running an event. And so I put him on the team. And I said, you're the guy who's not going to be out on the floor doing your normal job. And, we went through the week-long Kaizen and had just extreme success in the product that we were working on. We had a goal in this weld shop. It was a new product that we had put out on the floor, and we had been struggling to hit the numbers that we had set as goals. We wanted to get to, 10 units a week, which, 2 a day. And we were struggling at the time to get 2 a week. I mean, it was just really, really challenging. And we ended up pulling everything out of the entire department, all the tooling, everything that was bolted to the ground. We cut it up. We rearranged everything. We ran like a paper doll simulation of, okay, if we move this here and we put these operators in this area, and we included the team that worked in the area in a lot of that effort, so that they could walk through the steps and see how it would really change their roles. And this particular supervisor at the beginning of the week he had that mindset of, this is never going to work. We know how to weld. We know what we're doing back there. And, I had to convince him, like, we're not questioning whether you are skilled at your job. We know you are. What we're questioning is whether or not we've set you up for success back there, from an actual layout perspective and all that. And so after by the end of the week, the end of the project, we had moved every single major component, every fixture, every weld machine, everything was in a different location back there. And the first week after the event, I think we went from 2 a week to like 4 a week. So we doubled in 1 week. We were pretty excited about that. And without doing any other further changes, just letting people kind of settle into the role and figure out their process. Like 3 weeks later, we were at our goal. We were doing 2 a day, and we found we had 2 people extra in the department that really we should be moving to another area. And so it was just such a big win. And demonstrating that to that supervisor, that it really, the effort was pretty minimal compared to the payoff, right? Yeah. And that supervisor became a huge cheerleader for the entire program after that. And so I found that trying to include those, naysayers from the very beginning and kind of, like, for lack of a better word, force them through the process of showing just how much success you can get just by kind of working through the process, that you can really convert those holdouts to people who are going out there and pushing the program and really trying to include as many people as possible in it, because now they've seen that benefit.
Yeah. Well, let me jump in, and I want to put myself in the supervisor's shoes. So supervisor's got a responsibility. They got bonuses and all the rest of it that are riding on hitting 2 units a week. Like his boss or her boss says, you need to get 2 units a week. Great. Or whatever the quota is, kind of thing.
Yep.
And so now here comes this Tanner dude, and his lean team that they want to shut me down now for, I don't know how long, at least a week, probably 3-4 days, maybe. How does that supervisor communicate to his or her superiors that, hey, on the production side, we're going down. I'm not even going to give you 2. Like, how do you deal with that? Right. Because it's easy for us we've all drunk the Kool-Aid and we get it. But they got to go on faith that next week, we're getting 0 this week, but next week we're going to get 4. So we'll be fine. Right. But you don't know you're going to get 4. You might have a good idea. We'll improve, but you don't know for sure. Right. So talk about that, because it's really easy for us lean folks to say, oh, these people are resistant and this and that. But like, if we have honestly put ourselves in their shoes, and we have been in their shoes, it's scary, man. So talk about that.
So, it brings up a really good opportunity for things like meaningful metrics, A, and B, sometimes an improvement like this is going to hurt your metric. I mean, shipped units or completed units is really how any department should be judged, But if I'm going to run a project we know is probably going to hurt you for a week, maybe we need a holiday from that metric for the week, or maybe we need to give them some other opportunity to either make that time up or make those units up, to give them kind of the peace of mind that we're not here to just mess up your world, and again, go back to the little bit of a sales pitch of a little bit of temporary pain, but the long-term gain is going to be extreme. And especially if you're going from a situation like this department was, where we were working overtime every week, 10 hours of overtime every week in a weld department, that's expensive. Yeah. And I'd much rather pay, bonuses of hitting the goals inside of the allotted, 40-hour week that's planned. And so, and ultimately so would they would rather get it there too. So that motivation factor of, let's give you your time back and you can make that money back on bonus, structure. And we're not going to penalize you for the week that we've kind of thrown everything up in the air and ruined your metrics.
Yeah. And I don't know how you guys approach it, but like I've been in situations back when I worked in industry where I remember going into a plant in Sulphur Springs, Texas, in fact, and we were very similar. We're going to take this line down for at least a week. In fact, I think it was even longer than a week. And yeah, so they made 0 units, right, on this production line. This was a pretty high speed. We were making cell phones back in the day, and we made a lot of phones, man. And so when you take a line like that off for a week, you're talking big money, right? Like that's not being produced. But the one thing that we did, like I was sort of from the corporate team here to help, imagine that, kind of roll into this plant, but we got the plant manager on board, right? And we let the plant manager know you're going to get 0, man, and the plant manager, but we had showed evidence, hey, over in Springville, Utah, we did this and here's what we got. So we kind of had our own little marketing pitch, right? And we were able to sort of convince the general manager or the plant manager to give us a go. Let us try this because we're very confident you're going to yield positive results. And so in that case, the supervisor could put their mind at ease because their boss came in and said, we're going down for a week, right? And we want you all to be on board. We're on board. And that really made our job easier, right? Like the corporate sort of CI folks rolling in there to sort of help run the event. And it was a fantastic success. But I think the key for us was getting that plant leadership on board, right? And has that been sort of your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have, well, I guess first, if you're not in that position, that plant leadership role, then that's a critical hurdle to overcome. And so very, very clear expectations about what's going to happen in an event like that. Sounds like you mentioned, you gotta be clear, like, production is going to be 0. And if 0 is, uncomfortable, then, why, or what are the big reasons why we need to get some comfortability around that? We know that the improvement is coming, but it's still going to be a difficult, pill to swallow, for most production leaders who those metrics were really tied to their success, at the end of the year when it comes time for reviews and bonuses and all that good stuff. So.
Exactly. Yeah. They're putting their livelihood in the continuous improvement team's hands, really. Yeah. Right. So yeah, it's a tricky one. So I'm wondering, you've mentioned a few tools already, but I'm wondering if you have any sort of particular favorite tools or techniques, lean techniques that you've used, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they aren't typical or something like that. Like, what have you guys used that's had some success?
So one that I use seemingly all the time is the paper doll that I mentioned earlier. I like to use, scale replica cutouts of every tool in a cell, in either paper or cardboard, usually, an inch equals a foot or whatever, and then cut out every single thing in that department or in that area of concern, and then have a bigger piece that represents the actual floor space that you have to work in. And then you just shuffle those things around. I mean, you can do this in AutoCAD. You can do it in a million other tools that are on a computer, but there's really nothing like having the flexibility of having a physical piece of cardboard. It could be scrap cardboard, whatever. Just write what the tool is, which side is the front of it, cut out little operator, tokens or whatever, and just so that you can walk through the process and have everybody involved. And I just love that tool for the people who are not as visually spatial thinkers. It's so difficult for some people to picture in their mind how a space is going to be laid out when you're just talking about it. But if you have a physical representation in front of you, it's so much easier for those people who just don't think that way.
Yeah.
To really, see the process, picture it in their mind, and think through, okay, yeah, this is going to work, or, here's my challenges with whatever layout that we're discussing, and I think we need to fix this. Okay, great, and you can do it really easily with that paper doll method. And so I tend to fall back on that tool a lot when you're talking about cell design, flow, of material through a process, and any time that there's going to be, a handful of people involved, when it's not just, one or two people, but it affects a larger department, maybe, up to 10 people or so. And so that's one. And then, obviously from a root cause analysis perspective, 5 whys, super powerful, really easy for most people to understand. You can literally write it on any scrap of paper and work through that process of kind of helping identify a root cause. And then it really just starts the conversation about what are we going to do about it, And so those 2 tools, just super powerful in my opinion.
So talk a little bit more about this paper doll exercise. I kind of have an idea of what you're talking about, but I want to make sure. Do you go into a conference room and you got some tables and you just do it on a table, or are you doing it on a wall, brown paper? Talk about the mechanics of that exercise.
Right. So if it's in a formal Kaizen event, then having it laid out on a conference room table, or even just using some masking tape, you can use the table itself as your kind of work cell zone. You can map out the walls and any fixtures that are immovable. And you could just use a conference room table for that. That's really great. Or if it's not a formal event where you don't want to tie up a conference room table for potentially days. I like to do it out in the area as it's currently built. So I get a big piece of cardboard, a big box that you've broken down, draw on it with a Sharpie to mark your walls and the things that are immovable. Just draw that on a big flattened box, and then cut out other cardboard pieces to lay on that box. Leave them loose so you can move them around until you get to something that feels pretty solid, something that you think you've got a buy-in with the team. Let's try this. And then you can easily tape everything down and say okay, this is where we're at. This is what we think is going to be our next step. Let's give it a go. And then the great thing about it is that it's such a very clearly communicated idea. It doesn't need to be fully dimensioned. It doesn't need all that stuff, because with a ruler, you can tell exactly where everything goes, and so, and then when it comes time to actually move stuff into place, everybody has that available in the area to just start going, hey, we're going to move this thing over here because that's where it goes, right? That's where we'll put it. No lists need made, no committees need to be involved. It's just go time.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm wondering, do you keep it around like after the event? Like this,
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Like you could use it for training or something if someone new. Say, hey, here's how the operation works.
Exactly. So that tool becomes usable over and over. That's one of the things about a lean environment is that the key word is continuous, right? It's continuous improvement. So you may have settled on a floor plan for one improvement iteration, but the first time that a new product or a new challenge comes into place, maybe the company grows and all of a sudden you've got another person that you need to have doing work, that may affect your layout. And if that tool's readily available, it's really easy to say, okay, let's bring that back out, let's lay it back in the area, and now let's think about where do we put this new person.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I'm wondering, maybe to wrap things up, there's someone listening right now who maybe they're engineering background or they're responsible for some production area, but they're just getting started with this whole lean journey. Like, do you have any specific advice for someone who's just getting started with this whole journey?
I would say my advice would be to start with the things that you control. Don't wait to get approval to affect some department that you think is the biggest problem. Start with your office. Do a 5S project in your office. Set up whatever your processes are. Set those up for maximum success, and challenge yourself to put a metric in place for yourself that tells you whether or not you're succeeding. And so, really, it's really easy to see the benefits of all the tools and everything like that when you can do them in a way that affects your job in particular.
Yeah, I love it. Like I love it for one specific reason. Like so often when you're just getting started, you yourself may doubt, does this stuff really work? I know they wrote all the books and there's videos and this and that, but you got to prove it to yourself. So to your point, if you do it yourself and you see that it works, then again, you have a success story that you can share. Hey, listen, I'm just getting started with this, but here's what I did over there. Here's where I was before I did this thing. Here's where I was after. And that's, come see, right? And now you've got a success story, right? Whereas if you just sort of blindly go in with hoping it works, they said on the video it would work. It's like, well, yeah, that's nice, but let's get some actual results here in this building. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I really love about doing something like that is that it gives you that kind of icebreaker for somebody that comes into your work area, and they're going to comment like, "Oh, wow, your desk is super clean. I can never keep my desk this clean." That's an icebreaker, and you can say, "You know what? I challenged myself, and this is what I was able to end up with, and it's made my days. So it's improved my workflows. It's made it so I never lose a piece of paper. Give them the benefits, and maybe you've got your next project there is that person might want help doing that in their department too.
Right. Love it. Very good. Hey, Tanner, if folks wanted to connect with you personally, what's the best way?
My LinkedIn is probably my best spot. I try to be pretty active on there. I've got my personal page, and it's just I think it's linkedin.com/in/Tanner McClure.
Okay,
that's the best way. And then also with my consulting company, which is Tanner McClure Consulting LLC. I've got a LinkedIn page for that as well that folks can connect to me on.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll link everything up in the show notes. So everybody, please go connect with Tanner. So, hey, man, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
All right. You take care. Thanks for listening. Whether you've been on the continuous improvement journey for many years, or perhaps you're just getting started, Gemba Academy is here to support you. And while we're best known for our more than 1,500 Lean and Six Sigma teaching and virtual tour videos, We also have a team of experienced Lean and Six Sigma practitioners available for one-on-one coaching, as well as a variety of Lean and Six Sigma certification options. To learn more and to schedule a demo, head on over to gembaacademy.com.